The Chicago Bulls suffer yet another loss, this time to the OKC Thunder without Zach LaVine. We're going to talk a little bit about that. We're also going to talk about what's going on with Zach LaVine and comments about Zach from a former GM and Scott Perry. And we're going to talk about which Bulls players are set to benefit the most in the case of Zach LaVine being traded from the increased opportunities, specifically offensively. We're going to do all that, plus dive into the mailbag right after this.
You are now tuned in to Chicago Bulls Central, your number one place for all Chicago Bulls news and content.
What's going on, Bulls fans? Welcome to another episode of Chicago Bulls Central, your number one spot for everything Chicago Bulls related. I'm the host, Haize, but more importantly, you guys can follow the channel at Bulls Central Pod on every single social media platform we happen to be on. With that being said, let's go ahead and get into the content for today. And so the Bulls got their ass kicked yet again, to just be quite frank, by the OKC Thunder, and they couldn't do anything with Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. It didn't matter what they threw, what defender they threw, who they put on, and what scheme, trying to run anything. At the end of the day, they just couldn't do anything with Shai. And, there were some referees, some officiating things, but the Bulls were technically in this game again, right? And that's something that we continually see from the Chicago Bulls team. It's just a team that can be in games, but just can't win them, right? And so another slow start dooms the Chicago Bulls again, and that continually is the story. This team will show heart in the other quarters of the game, but for some reason, they just always get off the slow starts, only scoring 14 points and shooting 17% overall from the field in the first quarter of this game. That's not going to be enough to win it. And in the first half, it was really Coby White and Ayo Dosunmu that really helped keep the team anywhere close to being in this game. Now, we end up playing much better in the second half, specifically the third quarter, where we outscored them 38-34. We also shoot the ball over 54% overall from the field in the third quarter. But this Bulls team just continually, the deficits that they get themselves out to early, they just have to expound so much energy just to get back to the point of even tying the game that they usually don't have enough, especially when they don't execute defensively. And Shai was on fire, right? They fouled him in the late part of the game, was able to get his 40 points. But outside of that, Isaiah Joe scores 20 points. And Isaiah Joe guarding at times Patrick Williams in this game, and Pat not being strong enough or aware enough to use his strength against it. He outweighs Isaiah Joe by 40 pounds. Him and Nikola Vucevic, Patrick Williams and Nikola Vucevic in this game did not attack their mismatches in a way that I felt like they were even in the game or paying attention to the game. And, it's just another struggle. A sub 40% overall shooting game for the Chicago Bulls, 38 points. Coby White, DeMar DeRozan, the only over 20-point scorers in this game. Coby White, 18 of 17. DeMar DeRozan goes 6 of 17 for 25 points. But outside of that, man, it just was a struggle. We had Isaiah Joe outscored the whole entire Chicago Bulls bench that only scored 16 points by scoring his 20. And then you had Williams in there who also scored 13. This Bulls team just ain't it. And Zach LaVine was out of this game. For anyone who's blaming every single thing on Zach, listen, it's a team thing. The culture, the whatever, the mindset around this team, when it comes down to it, it isn't good at all. And so when you have a lack of effort, a lack of moving without the ball, the no off-ball movement actions for the Chicago Bulls is going to be something that always just deters the team and keeps them from being able to win basketball games at a high level, especially against well-coached teams like the OKC Thunder. So the Bulls now, they fall to 5-11 on the season, still got 66 games left this season, but when it comes down to it, this team it doesn't have the energy, it doesn't have the execution. They don't look like they want to be out there playing sometimes. The complete energy around this team is in the goddamn toilet. And, we'll see if the Bulls can end up coming out of it. But, I'm not overly hopeful with it. But, hey, if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. I'd love to be wrong with it. I'd love nothing more than to see the Chicago Bulls overall play much better on the back half of the season than what they've started this first fourth of the season off at. Because I tell you what, the team keeps playing like this, we're going to be in for much less than a 20-win season. This is about to be ugly, right? And yes, the pending Zach LaVine trade will change some things, but overall in this game, I just didn't like the execution, didn't like the energy, didn't like the lack of taking care of mismatches. And then you got Coby White, who was absolutely cooking in the first half of this game. Like I said, it really came down to Ayo Dosunmu and Coby White cooking in the first half of this game to keep the Bulls in this game. But then when you look at the second half, yes, DeMar DeRozan started getting going. DeMar DeRozan in the second half of this game goes 5 of 9 for 21 points. But Coby White gets 4 shots in the second half of this game. 4 shots when he was the one leading you in scoring in the first half of the game. He went 6 of 13 in the first half for 18 points. In the second half of the game, he went 2 for 4 for 5 more points. But listen, it should have been a lot more. Like, Kobe White should have been a bigger part of the game plan going down the stretch for this team. And once again, Billy Donovan just shows and proves he does not understand how to ride the hot hand. Much like Matt Eberflus, he's tone deaf. Now, a lot of people have also seen that Zach LaVine did miss this game by now, and that has led some questions to some Bulls fans asking, well, is a trade imminent? Is this anything? Are they going to hold him out the rest of the game? It's right foot soreness. I don't really think much of it. I think he'll be back when he's back. It's a long road trip, something like that. He may have, and he even went to like shoot around, things like that. May have tweaked it there. It is what it is. Now, I don't think this is tied to anything with the trade. I know there's going to be some conspiracy theories with that. I don't believe there's anything because the Bulls aren't going to trade Zach LaVine until December 15th. So sending him out now really wouldn't make sense. Maybe close when you get closer to that date. But with the Zach LaVine being the topic, former Knicks GM Scott Perry actually had this to say about Zach LaVine.
No question that Zach LaVine can score the basketball. He has proven that his 9 years in the NBA. I know this is his 10th season. He shot the ball well. He's a career 38% three-point shooter, explosive athlete. He has proven that he can score the basketball. Next thing that I look at, does he impact winning? Zach LaVine has been to one playoff series in 9 years. So he's played a total of 4 basketball games, 4 playoff basketball games. So now I say to myself, I'm looking at paying 40 this year, 43, 46, and 49 million in subsequent years for a guy who, to this point, has not impacted winning to the level that his money says he should impact. So there's not a real match there, in my opinion. Now, as I look at the teams, and you bring up a good point, Mo, when you start talking about him as a third option, which I think is the best fit.
And so while a lot of Bulls fans, a lot of Zach LaVine's critics have always said, hey, Zach LaVine is not a number one on the championship team. And I don't really think anybody really fought that anymore. I think we all realize that, yes, Zach LaVine at best is a number 2. Now, Scott Perry here says number 3, saying that he only played in 4 important games in his career, really kind of obliterating Zach LaVine. And here's what I'll say. Is the money the deterrent for Zach LaVine? Again, I think even with Scott Perry's comments, you're kind of taking away from where the NBA is going money-wise. And I think, yeah, you're paying Zach LaVine 40, 43 million, 49 million towards the end of this contract. But I think as the salaries keep increasing with Zach LaVine, it's going to not look as much as big as like what it seems like now. You got to talk about things in percentage of the cap. And Zach LaVine is signed for less than 20% of the cap. So, that's a thing too. But I do think that, looking at Zach LaVine and where he is, I think he needs to realize that he's not going to be a number one. And if he still has those thoughts and ideas, you're not. And I think Zach LaVine, we all know Zach LaVine would thrive in a place or theoretically in a place where he isn't the number one, the place where he can focus more on the things that he does well, and it doesn't make or break necessarily how successful the team's going to be. So when it comes down to it, I understand Scott Perry's comments. I think they were a little harsh. So to say and to act like Zach LaVine doesn't have any value around the league, I think it's off. But, you're going to get a lot of the takes on Zach LaVine now, and you're going to get a lot of the things, especially with teams maybe trying to, Scott Perry doesn't work for a team anymore, but you're going to try to not have to pay a certain value for Zach LaVine, which they're well in their rights to do, considering, again, how Zach LaVine's been playing this season. But with Zach LaVine, not being in this game, it made me think, which Chicago Bulls players could potentially benefit the most once Zach LaVine is gone? Now, again, this depends on what we're going to get back in the trade market, things like that. Because if you get back another ball-dominant player, then most of this goes away. But seeing the way that Kobe White scored, especially in the first half of the game, how he was more fluid, how the confidence built quarter after quarter, it made me start thinking, like, what other players potentially could benefit offensively from Zach LaVine not being on the team or when he is eventually traded. And so I look at it and I say Kobe White for sure, right? I think Kobe White being able to be more of that scoring guard out on the wing, because keep in mind, even when Kobe did start, he's always been here with Zach. Zach has been here since the start. And I think that Kobe, we've realized, and I've said this for a while now, he's a scorer, not a shooter. And so playing with Zach LaVine and then now even furthermore with DeMar DeRozan, it makes him have to be more of a shooter at times, not as, with the ball in his hands as much as he's kind of more comfortable with. And I think that Kobe White is one for sure, depending on what we get back for Zach LaVine, that you're going to see his offensive game maybe even round out a little bit more as he's able to kind of flourish and more and do those things. And so that's something that I'm definitely looking at with that. I think I think that Kobe White's going to be one of the ones that benefit the most from it. I would like to say Patrick Williams, but again, we've seen Pat without it. Now, one thing you could say is that you're now forced to probably put the ball in Patrick Williams' hands a little bit more. They didn't really do it a lot last night, even with him being in the starting lineup. Understand why, but maybe Patrick Williams. But I'm going to go to a surprising one, right? And Ayo Dosunmu is a player that I think, yes, was kind of miscast as being a point guard, right? And I think that we're seeing now, even with his role coming off the bench, that he's more comfortable, yes, having the ball in his hands too, but being able to do some off-ball things, kind of being able to kind of dictate pace, being a change of pace guard rather than, what he came in and had to try to set up offense. I think Ayo Dosunmu's offensive game could round out pretty nicely with the added shot attempts that could come to him via Zach LaVine not being on the team. And then Julian Phillips. With the way that Julian Phillips is cooking down in the G League, I'm not saying that necessarily this season right away he's going to come up and give an opportunity on the main roster. But the thing with Julian Phillips that stands out to me that we didn't see with Dalen Terry, that we didn't even see with Marko Simonovic, Julian Phillips has gone down to the G League, and with that level of competition has shown he's a head and shoulders above that level of competition. And could that get him some minutes depending on, again, what you get back for Zach LaVine? You could be looking for some minutes out there on the wing. Patrick Williams not necessarily performing the best either. Maybe you could start seeing a little bit of Julian Phillips gets maybe a little bit more consistent rotational minutes. So that's kind of my thought process. Let me know on some players that you think could benefit from, once Zach LaVine is traded. Again, not necessarily calling for Zach LaVine to be traded, but we all kind of see that that's the route that these things are going. But anyway, with it being Thanksgiving and the mailbag being full because of the situation that the Chicago Bulls find themselves in, you guys have been going off in the voicemail. We've got a lot of voicemails, so we're going to play 5 today, impromptu voicemail bag. We're going into the first one. This one's from the 757.
Hey, what's going on, Haize? I'm a big fan. I just started watching your stuff I want to say 2 months ago maybe. But we'll go ahead and just get started. As a Bulls fan, a diehard Bulls fan at that, I was coming into this season with high hopes, and I was thinking that the Bulls could, make a run, maybe, past the second round and, give the third round, the third round team in the playoffs, a run for their money, because of the hard work they put in the off season as far as looking on YouTube and seeing, them going to, DeMar's workout camps and stuff like that. But, it's unfortunate that we have to start off the way we did. I am not completely out on the Bulls yet, but I am completely out on Zach LaVine and his terrible attitudes toward this situation he's going through. I feel as if this is not a way you should handle this situation whatsoever. So I want him to leave Chicago. I pray that he, lands in a team that he can fully develop into a Hall of Fame player, and even that's a stretch. But, I'm saying, I appreciate if Zach would stay and develop here as our franchise player, we signed that type of money for him to be. But, it is what it is. But I just want to get your take on what's your definition of a rebuild. Most people will view it as, see our veteran players like Javon Carter, Torrey Craig, I guess maybe Andre Drummond, DeMar, Vooch, and Zach, just send them off all on, a different team and see them on their own ways and just give our young minutes some play. Pause. Is that your definition of a rebuild, or is it, maybe get rid of, some pieces for, to sign a Tyler Hero type of player, Duncan Robinson, who else? Maybe like a RJ Barrett type of player. Yeah, I just want to get your take on it. I appreciate if you do look at this. What's up, Bulls fans, and see red, and I love y'all.
Over the Zach LaVine drama, I think we're all over the Zach LaVine drama and just ready to get to a point to where it's settled and done with, and we know what this team's going to be going forward. Now, as far as my definition of a rebuild, my personal definition of a rebuild is when you basically are basically replacing most of your top level players now, and you're trying to build the team back up to where they were more than that over time, right? It's a long-term play, right? I can look at a retooling as a trade. Yes, you may trade one are two of your valuable pieces, but what you get back in those trades, you're trying to immediately go right back out and compete. Rebuild takes time. That's the way that I look at it. To me, when you go into a rebuild, you're going into something that you're saying, hey, it's gonna be a while, maybe 2, maybe 3 years before we're really, really competitive, but we're building this slowly over time. We're developing, right? That's kind of my thought of a rebuild. A retool is when you're still trying to compete after making some big moves, but you're still trying to compete, make the playoffs or whatever else it is. Compete, not contend. So that's how I look at a difference between a rebuild and a retool, so to say. You guys can let me know your thoughts down below. All right, let's get into this next voicemail. This one's from Justin from Bloody Horns Podcast, which you guys should be checking out.
Hey, what's up, Haize? This is Justin over at the Bloody Horns Podcast. I'm just wondering if you think part of Zach LaVine's trade request might be that he's sick of being the DeMar DeRozan's Batman. And I know what you're going to say. You're going to say there's no team out there that's going to make Zach LaVine the number one option. 100% agree with that. I just wonder if he looks at a guy like DeMar DeRozan, says, I shouldn't be the number 2 to him, and he looks over at some other places like the San Antonio Spurs have been mentioned. He could say, I could be number 2 to Wembanyama, or I could be number 2 if I go to the Kings to De'Aaron Fox or DeMontis Sabonis. I could be number 2 to Jimmy Butler if I go to the Heat. So I just wonder if that's part of his problem, is he looks at DeMar DeRozan and he says, I shouldn't be number 2 to this guy. Let me know what you think. Thanks, man.
Is Zach LaVine's request in part not wanting to be number 2 to DeMar? Here's what I'll say on that. My first mind when I heard this voicemail was to say no, right? Is because Zach LaVine and DeMar DeRozan have always averaged around the same amount of shots. The only year that DeMar DeRozan averaged more shots in the offense was the first year they came together, and that was because Zach LaVine was injured towards the end of that season. When Zach LaVine was fully healthy, they were 1A, 1B, right? But I do think that maybe some of it is looked at as saying, not necessarily just the number of shots, but to say, hey, I'm looking at this guy in DeMar DeRozan. This guy's about to be 34 years old. I'm supposed to be in my prime, right? Where's my time? Where's my opportunity? Now, my fight back against that would say, well, Zach has to earn and show that he's ready for those moments and those to take those shots in those big moments. And he's kind of failed when put in those situations. That's why DeMar DeRozan was brought here. But I do think that you could be onto something, that it could be a part of this that is saying, hey, I don't want to keep being second or even 1A, 1B to somebody of DeMar's level. Yeah, I could be a number 2 to Wemby. I could be a number 2 to LeBron and AD, or number 3 there. I can be a number 2 playing with De'Aaron Fox, right? Those type of things, maybe. And so I actually, when it's said and done, and I've always said this, I can understand both sides in this, the franchises and Zach LaVine's, and why they're ready to move on. And so I definitely think that could be part of the reason, Justin. I absolutely do think that. All right, let's get into this next one. This one's from Duke Bradford.
Hey, what's up, Haize? This is Duke Bradford out of Indiana, long-time listener. I want to speak on the Zach LaVine situation and the chemistry issue. I believe that, like I said a year ago, that the problem started after Lonzo got hurt and DeMar went on that run of hitting those game winners, and the younger guys loved him and embraced him as the number one guy, and the organization embraced DeMar as the number one guy, and so did Billy. And that's when Zach and Billy started having problems, and I believe that split the team because the teammates started picking sides. And now it's just to the point where Zach just got unbearable. His defense was lacking all the time. And now everybody is just tuning him out. Nobody came to his rescue. Nobody on the team that spoke out positively about him. So, yeah. What do you think about that? All right.
Are players tuning out Zach LaVine is how you ended that on the question. And here's what I'll say. I can't say that I feel like I've seen that per se, but maybe, and I've said this on, I think, an episode or so ago, maybe the players are at the point where they're trying to separate themselves from the drama, right? From just the, hey, we have to get ready. Zach's probably out of here. They'll have their thumb on that pulse more than we would as fans. And maybe they're just at this point trying to separate themselves and getting ready for life without Zach LaVine. So maybe that's what it is. And I can't say that Zach's ever been the boisterous leader on the court where I think people will have ever really tuned in, because I don't think he really says much like that. He's more of a leader through, hey, I just scored 15 points in a quarter. I need somebody to step up with me. So I'm not saying that you're wrong. I'm just saying I haven't seen it, but I can understand if that's the case, right? You guys can let me know what you guys think down below. All right, let's get into this next one. This one is from Grego.
Yeah, I think this Bulls team is an indictment on the general manager, AK, and Eversley. This team is constantly undersized. Every night it's unfair to have these 6'5", 6'6" players trying to guard these 6'10", 6'11", 7-footers. And AK is the guy. He had a chance to have Laurie Marketing, Bobby Portis, and Daniel Gafford with Vucevic. But he traded and let these guys get away in free agency. I don't understand it. It's indictable. This guy should. I don't understand how he gets to keep his job. The owner's not looking at what this guy's doing as a general manager. The thing in Denver, he got lucky. Everybody get lucky when they get a player, a franchise player like Nocic. But this guy is indictable. It's not working. I don't think he is capable of making his team. He's getting a chance to make another rebuild, and I don't think he deserves that. And Billy Donovan, he got all the answers after the game. When he sits in his post-game interviews, he got all the answers of what went wrong, whether he can't make an adjustment, he can't develop these players. It's an indictment that Patrick Williams he should be a G League player. And that's my opinion, and thanks for giving me an opportunity to speak on it.
Well, let me just correct you on one thing here. AK isn't the GM that traded Bobby Porter, so that was still Gar Forman and John Paxson. But I will say, yeah, I mean, I understand what you're evaluating, right? Like, when it comes down to it, like the Chicago Bulls or the AK has made deals that haven't worked. Now, I will say that you need to give him some credit in the fact that it wasn't just luck, right? Yes, he built the Denver Nuggets. He, stuck with a player like Jamal Murray when a lot of teams would have, moved off from him and things like that with his injuries. And then also here, right, let's keep in mind, he did build a team that was working with Lonzo Ball. Now, he has rebounded from that injury and Ball going down terribly. But to go to the question that you asked, and it's actually a great question there, is has AK done enough to earn the chance to go through a rebuild with this team? And I'm really of two minds from it. And the reason why is that he came in with a vision, even though it was different than what he kind of sold us in when he initially came, said they were going to build through the draft, build organically, develop things like that. He immediately went out, got veterans. Got a veteran in Vooch, turned around, got another veteran in DeMar DeRozan, got Lonzo Ball, got Alex Caruso. And then we were trying to compete, not necessarily contend, right? And then when you look at it, so that team was working. And there is something to be said of the way that team was working. Yes, they wouldn't have stayed number one in the East, but had you been able to then spend the last two off seasons continuing that path, fixing the holes in that team, maybe we would view the team differently. But then at the same time, you also need to get judged by the fact that how you rebounded from your initial plan going down. And they have not called any type of reasonable audible that has made sense and put this team in a better position, even back to where they were. And that 35-game stretch has really held them in a rough place. So here's what I'll say. In thinking about both the positives and negatives, the lack of drafting by this team, I don't think this team is going to go full rebuild, but what I will say is that this front office does get the opportunity to now see, all right, this is the problem that you cooked, right? I had a episode a couple of days ago that said that we find ourselves in a storm that the front office created. And now, how do you get us out the storm? Let's see what your plan is now to correct this. You now have something that's forcing you to go in that direction because of the Zach LaVine trade request. And now you have to, let's see what you're going to do. Let's see how you rebuild to that. So they're probably going to get another 3 to 5 years. That will put him around that usual decade of time that a Bulls president usually gets anyway. And I think this is going to be telling. And that's why I've said this team has to hit on the next 3 out of the next 4 drafts. Has to. Doesn't mean that it has to be superstar level players, but they have to be players that we see how they're progressing and how they're going to be a part of the Chicago Bulls' future. And so I think they get that opportunity. But how this is going, and the Zach LaVine trade is going to be a big judge of how that's going to be. And we're going to see if this team can get us out of this storm that they've created. But all right, let's get into the next voicemail, the last voicemail for today. This one is from Joe the Blacksmith.
Yo, Haize, this is Joe the Blacksmith. I just want to say you're doing a great job covering the team, man. Appreciate your content. But hey, man, I just want to bring up, what is the deal with this team being constructed to be kind of leaning towards small ball? Vooch isn't particularly large for center and has very little athleticism. And then you got Caruso at power forward, and we can't shoot. How do you have a small ball team that does not shoot well? That's great. I can't believe we're going on 3 years of this issue. What are your thoughts on that, man? I feel like it's something that's not brought up enough. It's just ass backwards as it can possibly be. All right, man. Well, appreciate you. Thanks a lot. Bye.
Another one on size. And I agree with you. the size issue on this team, and I would say less than just size, it's the lack of rim protection, right? The lack of rim protection on this team, I think, is the thing that we kind of see and that stands out the most to us and that hurts us at times. He did go out and get Drummond. He did bring in Torrey Craig. But, yeah, we're still starting now Alex Caruso at the 4 when Zach LaVine's healthy. And I worry about what that's going to do to Alex Caruso's body and his health and things like that, too. When it comes down to it, I think that we're seeing a mixture between the way that AK, the roster that he envisions, and then the way that Billy Donovan is going to use that roster. And, maybe having a kind of a traditional big that's kind of mobile and can shoot and can do some rim protection is in the future for the Chicago Bulls, hopefully, because it does seem that Billy Donovan and AK, to a degree, have a affinity for small ball. And we'll see what that ends up bringing. But all right, y'all, thank you guys so much for tuning in to another episode of Chicago Bulls Central. Make sure you guys are following the show at Bulls Central Pod. You can send us any feedback, questions, comments, concerns, bullcentralpod@gmail.com. Lastly, if you want to leave a text message and our voicemail for the mailbag, the number to do so, 773-270-2799. We are the number one spot for everything Chicago Bulls related, thanks to you guys. And like I like to end every episode on, go Bulls. Love you guys. See red if you can, y'all. Peace.
This has been a presentation of the Break Media.